Thank you very much, Stuart. First thing to say is that this has definitely been a journey of mutual inspiration with Lydia. And in the way that Lydia would want and the way that I would want, this isn't about us and it isn't about Lydia. However, having said that, I want to say a little bit more about Lydia because it is about her and about us and what we do and how we are and how we be. So the first time I met Lydia, some of you have heard this before, the first time I met Lydia I will never forget, in the airport, at Nairobi airport, when I was in transit in Kenya. And I'd arranged to meet with her because she was trying to decide whether to come to Australia to do her Ph.D. with me and us at the piece of conflict studies at the University of Sydney. And I met with Lydia and her husband, and despite the advice from me and somebody else about his previous experience and difficulties and challenges of trying to pay those extraordinarily high tuition fees at the University of Sydney from an international, not just the University of Sydney, in Australia for international tuition fees for a PhD, Lydia, and I'm going to say, was completely determined that she was going to come anyway, and which was an amazing experience, of course, and one of the best decisions, I think, for all of us in a lot of ways, and not least of all South Sudanese. So I wanted to pay tribute to Lydia for her wisdom, her courage, her faith, and her determination, above all, in coming to Australia to do her PhD, to bring her family with her, to make it possible to obtain fellowships along the way, and even some funding from the Dean of the Faculty of the Arts and Social Sciences at the University of Sydney, and with the support as well. And I want to mention the support and the things that I've learned from relating with Lydia and how this relates to her approach to her life and her research in terms of the support from her family, her church community, her friends, her colleagues, her mentors, and her fellow students along the journey. And she called it a journey, this journey of hers towards a PhD, and relating that with the journey of the people who are trying to rebuild their lives, the puzzle, she calls it at the end of her book, of how to rebuild peace after mass violence. So Lydia's topic, as you might have gathered by now, it really was, and I'm going to attest to it as an academic in this field, it was a groundbreaking topic, and the time was absolutely right and needed for it. She was leading the field in this area. I was doing this as well in my own way. I was looking at the interviews. I was absolutely focusing in my research on the experiences of people in local communities, in Rwanda, in Cambodia, in Timor, in Sierra Leone, in Burundi most recently. What were their experiences of trying to build peace in their communities, and particularly around issues of justice and reconciliation? And then Lydia came along at the same time as when I was exploring new horizons in Burundi with the idea of trauma healing and its connection with peace building. Now, and I know that this was new, right? It was hardly anybody was making the connections between psychology and peace building, between what Lydia mentioned before, between trauma healing, mental health services, psychosocial services, and the macro level economic structural peace building. And that's what my research has been about, and that's what Lydia found the opportunity to publish an article which we did together in the Journal of Peace Building and Development when they were doing an issue about social services in peace building and development. And we were able to get our article published about the role of psychosocial services. Yeah, and that was groundbreaking, I think. And so, Lydia's a determination to look at this topic, and she wanted to, not only did she want to go to Kakuma, that wasn't what it was. She wanted to go to South Sudan to do her research, to do her field research. That's where we had the impenetrable ethics issues, which I tend to agree with in this case, because it was about security issues. So the security and ethics aren't the same thing, but that was part of the reason for not going to South Sudan much. We tried to work out how it might be possible. So in the end, coming up with the option and the something that was close to Lydia's heart from her previous experience in visiting refugee camps in Kenya was to be able to talk with the refugees there on the ground. So she not only made that possible, she then went on to publish about that and to bring that to her life and work here in Australia. So then, to come back to that idea of bringing psychology and peace building together, there's two developments I wanted to briefly mention internationally, which are bringing those things, one's international, one's local. So one internationally, the psychosocial peace building, right, is a new field that's being developed since Lydia started her PhD. Yeah? And in 2015, there was an international conference jointly organised by the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation in South Africa, War Trauma Foundation in the Netherlands. And that conference was talking about this very link. Yeah? So it was the conference was called Healing Communities, Transforming Society, Exploring the Interconnectedness Between Psychosocial Needs, Practice and Peace Building. So that was the focus of that conference. Yeah? And around that time, I also went to a conference which was also talking about the role of trauma healing and peace building that was organised by the USAID, actually, in Nairobi. So this was all happening around that time. And then last year, I was invited to be part of an experts meeting to build on this. And we're now working on guidelines to define what psychosocial peace building means. And that is bringing together the macro peace building things that Lydia's talking about with the micro, the relationship building, the psychosocial aspects, which is really, really exciting. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is closer to home and relates back to what Jorge was saying earlier about the work of New South Wales Starts and the other agencies around Australia in trying to support people from a refugee background who come with experiences of torture and trauma. So that's a research project that I've been working on and Lydia's been supporting, that is trying to understand all the different community-oriented programs that are being run in Australia that focus on how to, the services, and how do they link the idea of community activities to the more clinical approach, the clinical psychotherapeutic approach to trauma, and the community-oriented programs and their approach and their contribution. So as part of that research project, my research assistant, who's here somewhere, Raphael, and I have been, he's been doing most of the interviews, which is fantastic, with the different agencies, with the community, with the program facilitators and service providers to understand more about how these programs contribute to healing, to community resilience, and to social capital as an idea of the importance of, this is the theory behind the practice that we've developed together with STARTS. I acknowledge STARTS as being part of supporting this project. That is, talking about what it is around bridging and relating people in the communities with each other, with a move to their empowerment in society and making social change, trying to make it a little bit more like heaven, maybe. So to conclude, and I will conclude, that so I want to make sure it's time for questions. That this research that we're doing in Australia with people from a refugee background, that I've been doing similar kind of research in Burundi, looking at the people over there. It's the same people. Somebody very wisely said to me, some of them managed to resettle in Australia, some of them are still in their home countries. Trying to understand trauma, how does it affect people? How can these two parts of peace building be brought together? And within Australia, so your concept of trauma-sensitive peace development and trauma-sensitive peace building and responding to the trauma sensitivity gap, the research in Australia, I think, is looking at not only what Jorge referred to as the, what did you say? I had it, now I can't see it. Trauma-informed societies, thank you. And but it also a concept of trauma-sensitive community development as the kind of localised equivalent of peace building in this country. So that's what I'd like to finish with, and thank you very much for the opportunity to